Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Israel's operation in Gaza, the fighting of Hamas. It began as Operation Swords of Iron, and now, over a year and a half later, since the massacre of October 7th, the operation that's beginning anew in Gaza is called Operation Gideon's Chariots, a powerful name, a symbolic name, as are many of the monikers given to Israel's operations over the years. A name chosen for its historical reference, a name intended to inspire the soldiers and reservists called to duty in defense of the Jewish homeland. Israeli leadership tends to name their military operations using profound terms, literary symbols, and oftentimes biblical images. Exactly how these operational names are chosen is a bit of a mystery. The Mossad, we are told, is responsible for naming their own operations. Conventional wisdom has it that the names of IDF operations are chosen by a committee. Of late, I hear, a computer spits out naming options. Operation Wrath of God was given to an operation conducted by the Mossad between the years 1972 and 1979. During this operation, agents of the Mossad were charged with finding and then assassinating those terrorists, enemies of Israel and the Jewish people, responsible for the massacre of the Israeli athletes in Munich. The name says it all. 3 words that summon up the sentiments of all Israelis and Jews after the massacre of the Israeli stars at an international sporting event that symbolized unity. Operation Shevet Achim, literally brothers dwell together in unity, was officially translated by Israel as Operation Brother's Keeper. The operation began as Yad Le'achim, give your brother a hand. The operation, which involved the dismantling of Jewish Gaza, turning it over to Palestinian rule, extended from August 17th through September 12th, 2005. It was the Israeli pullout from the Gaza Strip. It was a military operation conducted by the IDF. I was there. Operation Swords of Iron. The name alone, Swords of Iron, evokes strength. The IDF loves the image of the sword. That explains why many of the symbols of IDF's units utilize the sword. The sword is an ancient symbol of strength. These many months later, the operation has exchanged a sword for a chariot. This name, Gideon's Chariots, uses a different metaphorical image and message. Operation Gideon's Chariots is a name that resonates with the name as its roots in the Bible. The operation invokes imagery of the great biblical warrior Gideon. Gideon was the warrior that God enlisted to defeat the brutal and powerful Midianites. Gideon, we are told, trounced the Midianites with just 300 men. Using Gideon's name in this Gaza operation is significant. Gideon did not defeat the Midianites with thousands of Israelite warriors. Gideon defeated the Midianites with strategy, tactics, skill, and ingenuity. He had them turn on one another, and this biblical hero then tapped into their fears. They fled in fear for their lives. In the beginning, Gideon had 25,000 soldiers. He weeded them down to 300 using 2 separate tests. First, he spoke to them saying, if you're afraid, leave, go home. 15,000 potential warriors left, leaving him with the remaining 10,000 recruits. Second, he told the recruits to drink water from a local water source. All those who knelt, laid down, and lapped the water with their faces or their tongues in the water were released and sent home. Those who cupped the water with their hands are those who passed the final test. This was not an issue of polite behavior or proper etiquette. Those who squatted down and drank, putting their heads and tongues to the water, were left defenseless and vulnerable. Those who cupped the water in their hands were still able to observe their surroundings and defend their army and others while drinking. Those 300 brave and faithful soldiers executed a plan. They surrounded the Midianite army, the camp, at night, Each soldier was armed with a shofar, a clay pot, and a torch. In unison, they blasted the shofars, broke the pitchers, and lit their torches, giving the Midianites the impression that they were surrounded by a huge army. The Midianites panicked and fled for their lives. Operation Gideon's Chariots, a fitting name for what we all hope to be the final stage of the war in Gaza against Hamas. The IDF is using Gideon and his men as role models. His force displayed bravery, planning, strategy, tactics in the face of daunting odds, and Gideon's army had the faith in God required. It might surprise you to learn that there were no actual chariots in Gideon's battle, as described in the early chapters of the biblical book of Judges. That was the entire point of the story. The Midianites had far superior weapons and soldiers. They had chariots. What they lacked is what Gideon and his soldiers had. What Gideon and his team had was bravery, wisdom, and a very good plan and faith in God. They were fighting for the right cause. Today, like Gideon, the IDF is fighting for that same cause, the right cause. They are fighting evil in Gaza. Coming up next, Points of View. Both pieces today are from the Jerusalem Post. First is a column and the second is an editorial. Both express excellent points to keep in mind in the future. Here is the column from the Jerusalem Post. It's entitled, "The Writing is on the Wall, but no one is reading it." Opinion: brutal killing of 2 Israeli embassy staff in Washington exposes pattern of ignored warnings and rising anti-Semitic incitement, requiring immediate action and dedicated body to monitor and combat global threats against Jews. It's written by Racheli Baratz and was published on May 22nd, 2025. This is how Baratz begins. This morning opened with profound shock. The horrific murder of 2 Israeli embassy employees in Washington, 2 families whose world has been shattered, and a chilling news story that will echo in every news cycle for a brief time. But does this really surprise anyone? The writing, literally and figuratively, was on the wall, the virtual wall of social media, the wall of extremist forums, the walls of vandalized synagogues, and even the wall of the embassy itself. Except instead of reading and writing, we looked away. Baratz now introduces us to the PSI, the organization that influenced Elias Rodriguez, the confessed murderer of Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram. She writes, "This horrifying incident is neither random nor isolated. It is the direct result of relentless incitement of loss of sovereignty, of consciousness, in the face of extremist anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic movements. The alleged perpetrator, Elias Rodriguez, has been identified as an active member of the Radical Party of Socialism and Liberation, an extremist group with harsh anti-Israel positions operating out of Chicago." And here, the real story begins. Already in February 2023, long before October 7th, a poster was published by the PSL movement openly calling "Exterminate Zionists." We cannot claim we were surprised. We cannot argue that there were no indications. Anyone who wanted to see, saw. Anyone who should have acted remained silent. The deep gap between community cries and the absence of official response cost lives. It's time to remember every nation is obligated to the security of its citizens. Jews are not second-class citizens, all the more so when dealing with official emissaries, state representatives, who serve that same host nation. Now Baratz illustrates how the leadership, Jewish and non-Jewish leadership in the United States and in Israel, have been silent and actionless against these illegal acts of violence and hatred. Baratz writes, "The future in this case is not only of forces on the ground, but also decision makers on both sides. In recent years, dozens of discussions on anti-Semitism have been held in Israel's Knesset. Time and again, harsh data, serious warnings, and intelligence information from private sources, organizations, groups, and activists were presented. But at the end of the day, the information remained on paper. No state body was budgeted to operate in international arena. No independent intelligence monitoring unit was established. The words remained in the air and the writing on the walls of social media. Baratz repeats the charge that there is nobody and no organization that culls and puts all this information together. That is a problem because one cannot act to solve the problem without accurate information and knowledge. She writes, there is currently no dedicated body, neither governmental nor non-governmental, that consolidates intelligence, monitors anti-Semitic discourse, identifies immediate threats, and refers them to appropriate authorities. The many Knesset discussions on anti-Semitism will not help if they do not yield a clear operational result. Establishing an independent, funded, dedicated body with research, intelligence, reporting, and advocacy arms. Such a body could operate in the American and international arena without requiring diplomatic approvals from countries that sometimes prefer to bury their heads in the sand. It would consolidate what is currently scattered among hundreds of Jewish and community organizations, without authority, without funding, and without political backing. This is how Baratz concludes. She insists that it's time to act, to organize, and to respond to the hatred. She writes, the writing is not just on the wall, it's in the tweet, in the post, on the poster with horrifying inscription, exterminate Zionists. And today, it's in the blood of 2 Israeli representatives. If there is one clear lesson from the horrific case, it is that we can no longer afford to wait. The time has come for an action mechanism, not just an empathy mechanism. Until that happens, more and more writing will appear on the wall, and more families will become victims. If we don't act now, the next victim is already writing their name on the waiting list. This is a chilling and excellent piece, and a call to action. Thank you, Racheli Baratz. Next up is an editorial from the Jerusalem Post, published on May 21st, 2025. Remember, an editorial is an unsigned, and it's the opinion of the editorial board. The editorial is a biting critique of Western leaders and countries. This is how the editorial begins. When Hamas applauds you, it's time to rethink your stance. Editorial. The UK, Canada, and France do not see the cause and effect of Hamas's use of the Gazan population to achieve its attempted goal of demonizing Israel. The editorial begins. France, Britain, and Canada made damning statements on Tuesday to threaten sanctions against Israel if it does not halt its military operations in Gaza and lift aid restrictions. Although they may seem justified in the narrow context of the horrors experienced by Palestinians in the embattled enclave, they completely ignore the larger context of the reason and the push behind Israel being there in the first place: Hamas and Iran. Their statement reads, we oppose any attempt to expand settlements in the West Bank. We will not hesitate to take further actions, including targeted sanctions, they said. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded. The leaders in London, Ottawa, and Paris are offering a huge prize for the genocidal attack on Israel on October 7th, while inviting more such atrocities. Nowhere, however, did they mention the egregious actions of Hamas in holding and torturing hostages in unspeakable conditions, nor did they mention that all the suffering in Gaza could end tomorrow if Hamas released the hostages and laid down their arms. The editorial concludes with a very poignant point. If Hamas is praising you, something is wrong. They write, the proof is in the pudding that the warnings of the 3 countries were misguided and damaging was the immediate reaction by the terrorist group, which welcomed the joint statement issued by the leaders of Britain, France, and Canada, rejecting the policy of siege and starvation pursued by the occupation government against our people in the Gaza Strip, and the Zionist plans aimed at genocide and displacement. This position is an important step towards restoring respect for the principles of international law, which the terrorist Netanyahu government has sought to undermine and overturn. It added, perhaps when terrorists who committed the worst massacre in this century agree with you, it's time to recalibrate your beliefs. This was a profound editorial, and so true. It seems so simple. If Hamas thanks you, that certainly means that you are doing something very wrong. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 7 cartoons today. Most deal with humanitarian aid, and they are very anti-Israel, condemning Israel for not providing the aid to Gaza. First up is an Israeli tank smudged with food, dirt, and other things. On the tank are food pots about to plow over skulls. The tank is called Gideon's Chariots. Its meaning is that the new Israel operation in Gaza, Gideon's Chariots, is not going to make any easier for the people of Gaza. Next up is a person holding up an empty food pot in Gaza. If you look carefully, the pot is actually a sad face. From the sky, bombs and food are being dropped into Gaza, which is totally destroyed. Third up are 2 tanks in Gaza. Bibi is on one of them. They're firing at Gaza. Gazans behind the tanks are asking Bibi for food, and he responds by saying, "Sorry, we can't hear you." This next cartoon has Bibi crossing a line. He looks villainous, wearing a Star of David. The cartoon is entitled "Crossed the Line." This 5th cartoon is sick, just sick. Bibi is standing at the political podium, giving a speech. He's holding his hands up in victory and waving the Israeli flag. And he announces, "We just bombed the last hospital in Gaza." The sign on the lectern reads, "Mission accomplished." To imagine, even think, no less draw, publish, and then print that Israel is celebrating the deaths of innocents is so warped. The 6th is also a warped depiction. The cartoonist has drawn a rock band called Genocide, with Bibi as the lead guitarist. And Israel is singing and dancing over the skulls, the band, Genocide, in the Promised Land Tour. And finally, the 7th cartoon is entitled Humanitarian Aid Netanyahu. Bibi is dropping aid, and attached to each aid package is a bomb. These cartoons depict the way Israel is being seen throughout the world. It is both sad and very scary. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, said during a visit to Navy base in Ashdod that all Hamas is doing now is sitting and updating targets in border-adjacent communities through entities provided with them by the intelligence of Iran. According to Katz, Hamas is still planning how to continue even now, which is why we must achieve victory here. No organization is invincible. Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas landed in Beirut for a diplomatic visit in Lebanon. Mahmoud Abbas welcomed the threats and measures taken by the European Union against Israel following the siege of the Gaza Strip and ongoing fighting there. Abbas said, "We welcome EU countries that oppose policies of siege, displacement, starvation, and occupation." He called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and for allowing UN aid deliveries. The European Union announced it would review its relationship agreement with Israel amid continued fighting and limited aid entering Gaza, which is described as a drop in the ocean. The U.S. will appoint Donald Trump's friend and Washington ambassador to Turkey, Thomas Brock, as a special envoy to Syria. This was reported by 2 sources familiar with the details to Reuters. So we picked that up from Reuters. In an ironic twist that made me chuckle, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that the U.S. Golden Dome project, which President Trump presented, undermines global stability. The minister also called on the U.S. to abandon the new missile defense system. Trump said the system would include space-based interceptors and claimed that its deployment would begin before the end of his White House term. This is also funny, in 2029. That's funny. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a released video that the next Knesset elections will be held on schedule, after he did not respond to a question on the matter during press conferences. In the video, Netanyahu said that the elections would be held because we are Democrats. We believe the public has the right to choose, unlike our opponents and others who say, what does it matter if you're elected? We will decide who the heads of the Shin Bet and other civil service commissioners are. Qatar's foreign ministry issued a statement condemning the attack in which 2 Israeli embassy employees were killed in Washington. Qatar's statement read, and this is the exact quote from the statement, published in English. The foreign ministry reiterates Qatar's position opposing violence and terrorism regardless of the motives and reasons. Even Canada, the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, wrote on his X account that he is shocked by the murder of 2 Israeli embassy workers in Washington. Carney added that this was a targeted attack against the Jewish community, a violent act of anti-Semitism. This hatred is intolerable, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms. Karen Hind Rajid, who leads the legal pursuit of IDF soldiers abroad, claimed that law enforcement authorities in Peru announced the opening of a criminal investigation against an Israeli citizen who they allege was involved in genocide, which was committed in Gaza in their eyes during the fighting in 2023-2024. This is very interesting. This woman literally goes around and tries to arrest Israeli soldiers. The IDF struck Al-Qahira currency exchange office in Gaza, which has been used in recent years to store and transfer tens of millions of dollars to fund Hamas and Islamic Jihad military and terrorist activities. In August 2024, the currency exchange worker, actually the head, Tahsin al-Nadim, was assassinated after directly assisting in the funding of terrorist organizations and their activities. Even after his assassination, the office continued its operation, its funding and the transfer of money to terror groups. An official U.S. report announced its findings that Columbia University violated its students' civil rights according to the findings from the Department of Health's Office of Civil Rights. Amid ongoing tensions between this New York University's administration and the U.S. government over campus anti-Semitism issues, the detailed statement indicated that the university showed deliberate indifference to harassment experienced by Jewish students since the Hamas attack in October 2023, violating federal civil rights law. According to the findings, the university failed to investigate swastika graffiti or punish those responsible, intentionally did not enforce protest rules against pro-Palestinian demonstrators, and inadequately handled Jewish students' complaints. This report, by the way, was no surprise at all. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Rachel Poland Goldberg is the mother of Hirsch, who was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by Hamas. He was at the Nova Festival. His face and story became a symbol of all the hostages. In this short 4-minute clip, she addresses, this brave and bereaved mother addresses a question about God, her relationship with God, in a statement and in the aftermath of her son's brutal murder.
Do you both still know God in the same way today as you did before October 7, 2023?
It's such a poignant question because I feel like I know God so much better. And I think everybody has an idea of God. I think everybody's idea of God is very personal and very different, even if we think we are all on the same page in our little clusters of belief systems or brands of Judaism. But I think it's, for me, and this will probably sound strange, I haven't said it to anyone, I don't think, except for John, but I actually feel that the closest that I've ever come to feeling, really feeling God, is when Hirsch was killed. It felt so unbelievable that it could only be from God. And I heard Hirsch's principal from his high school, Rabbi Shlomi Danino, who's just a beautifully knowledgeable rabbi at this school for 900 Orthodox boys in Jerusalem. He spoke recently and was saying one of the interpretations about the book of Job that is part of, in the Jewish Bible, we have this book about a man who was supposedly a good man, and all of these terrible tragedies befell him. He lost his wife, he lost his children, all of them. He suffered a terrible disease. And what Rabbi Danino was explaining was that there's an interpretation where Job says to one of his friends, "I'm not a saint, but I'm not a terrible person. So I know this is not a punishment. And I know this is from God. And I know I don't understand it. But I know that it's from God." And that's really how I feel. I really feel that. I'm not a saint, but I'm not a horrible person. And I know this is not a punishment. And certainly Hirsch was not a saint nor a horrible person. And I know it's not a punishment. And I know it's part of this. I grew up in Chicago, and my mother was very determined to make me a cultured person. And so she would drag me to the Chicago Art Institute all the time and force me to look at all of this art. And there's this famous painting by George Seurat, A Sunday on the Island of La Grande Jatte. It's the pointillist masterpiece that if you look at it very closely, it doesn't make any sense. It's just a bunch of dots and chaos and blurriness. And when you step back, then you see this glorious tapestry of gorgeousness. But when you're very close and in it, you don't see it. And I really believe, and maybe this is a survival tactic, maybe it's, the lies we tell ourselves to keep ourselves okay, but I believe that there is a grand tapestry. And I don't have the hubris to say that I understand the tapestry, but I'm faithful that it's there. And that's why I think that this indescribable blow that we're learning how to digest is also, in some way, a kiss from God.
Rachel is a very powerful and thoughtful person, especially in the aftermath of her son's brutal murder. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.